You know, a wise man once said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." But me, currently, I'm not doing any journeying right now. I'm sitting here on my bed, in my bedroom, flapping my gums, beginning this first introductory episode of this podcast that you're listening to. You're probably doing a little bit more journeying than I am right now. Maybe you're at work, maybe you're driving in your car, maybe you're getting some household chores done, or something else of that like. But me, I'm being a big old lazy ass, sitting here in my bed, talking to you, and you're hearing me flap my gums right now. But hopefully that's a good way to start this podcasting journey with me, and hopefully it keeps you entertained for quite a while. Greetings, hard and heavy music fans, and welcome to this first introductory episode of the Heavy Haystack podcast, a podcast all about all things heavy music. I'm your host, Dante Montgomery, and considering this is the first episode of the podcast, you might have some questions. For example, why do I use the term heavy music to describe what this podcast is about? Well, there's a whole lot of division amongst fans of what I call heavy music. And by heavy music, I mean genres like heavy metal, hard rock, punk rock, hardcore punk, maybe even industrial, and other things that are musically on the hard, loud, fast, or aggressive side. And the reason why I refer to this over-encompassing style of music as just heavy music is because there's a lot of division and debate with certain bands and certain music artists about what is or isn't metal, what is or isn't punk, what is or is not hardcore. And I think all of that tends to lean towards the side of bullshit. A lot of these different debates and arguments about who's metal and who isn't, and all this gatekeeping is really detrimental to the music and the scene as a whole. So I just refer to all of it as heavy music to basically give an umbrella for all of this music to fall under. Because generally, if you like one of these styles, you tend to like most of the others. And it's a really petty spot of debate that I just like to get out of the way and bring us all together. So for this first introductory episode, I wanted to give you all a certain idea of what to expect from the podcast in the future. Essentially what we'll be talking about on here, what the format's going to be, and what you can generally expect. The idea I had with this podcast is that we're going to have generally two separate formats. This isn't going to be an interview podcast like many other music podcasts generally are, for two reasons. One, there's already a whole bunch of interview podcasts out there. You can find many of them that would be very higher quality than anything I could do. You have things like the Metal Sucks podcast, the Justice Show, the freaking one that Rob Flynn from Machine Head does, whose name escapes me right now. On top of many other great ones that I listen to and many others already do. The other reason why I'm not doing an interview style podcast is because I'm some random jack-off that does not have access to any type of high-level guests that most people would care about. Sure, I could get local people on my podcast all day, and in my general musical circle, I could get a lot of that and entertain them, but it wouldn't really be of much interest to music fans at large. And also, it's good to try something a little bit different, something a little out of the box, or just something that you can actually do, considering that I can't get guests that are that high. But anyway, this is going to be two different formats. One is what I call the album ranking format. That format will be me and a co-host essentially going over a popular band's discography and ranking and debating the band's history and albums, and the listeners having fun hearing us go back and forth with that one. My co-host for that one will be my good friend and bandmate, Mr. David Andrew Langley. And some of you listening might know David, and you know that he's quite the character, to say the least. Quite the entertaining figure that will be add a whole lot of spice to the podcast to make those debates about different bands and albums quite entertaining. We already have a first band picked. It's one that's got a long and storied history, a band that both me and David like a whole lot, and is a big part of both of our musical journeys, and that would be Mastodon. And that will be a first episode. We'll be going through the discographies, like from beginning to end, giving a little bit of the band's backstory and history, and then us just debating the highs and lows of the career, which albums we think are the top ones, which ones we think are the worst, and things of that nature. However, with that rank album format, the thing with that is that those type of episodes are the ones that will take a whole lot of research and a whole lot of time. And that's not one that we could get out to you on a super regular basis. Maybe if we really stick to it, we could get that type of format done every 2 weeks. But that will be still a challenge. So those will be kind of special occasion episodes that we'll try to get out. Because especially once we get to bands older than, say, a Mastodon or earlier than the 2000s, especially getting into bands like the Judas Priest, the Iron Maidens, the Black Sabbaths. Those have discographies that span multiple decades. I mean, Black Sabbath alone has many records that spawn all the way from the dawn of heavy music, 1970, all the way up to, I think their last album was in 2013, if I remember correctly. So those episodes would probably be multi-parters that would have to be covered over several hours. So I have a second format that would be the general format or the solo format that we could get out to you a lot more often. Essentially, that would just be me going over different general things related to heavy music. For example, I'll be going over the latest metal news, maybe talking about new tours that are announced, new albums that just get announced, or whatever hot drama there is going on in the scene. Because everyone knows that drama sells, and people just love talking about it all the time. And I can give my 2 cents and opinions on that, and you all can add yours as well through our social media sites and through the podcast email, which would be thehaystack@gmail.com. Besides metal and heavy music news, I'd also be covering new singles. Like, for example, there's this week, the date today is July 12th, and certain singles I would talk about, for example, in this week would be the new Parkway Drive single that released. Bring Me the Horizon released a new single called Strangers, and I would give little short reviews of those new albums, well, not albums, but singles, both keep you all informed of what the bands that you know and love are releasing, as well as give my 2 cents and reviews on those, whether they're good, whether they're great, the context of the release, and things of that nature. And also, I would also be talking about albums of the week, which would probably take up the most time of the episode. Basically, all the both notable albums, big and small, like I would cover. For example, this past Friday, there weren't a whole lot of huge names that were released. I know that on the 1st of July, I think July 1st was a Monday. No, July 4th was a Monday. July 1st was Friday, a release day for albums. The first one for July. And for example, like that week, there was new releases such as Municipal Waste's Electrified Brain album. There was Shinedown with their Planet Zero record, and which are like bigger name releases that like most people that are fans of heavy music would know about, but also go over the smaller independent releases, and the smaller music labels and like smaller artists. For example, this past week, death metal band of the new wave, Vomit Forth, released a new dope-ass album that I will possibly talk about on the first official episode of the podcast, as well as other things. There's the Machinist, who I think are on Prosthetic Records, releasing some groovy deathcore stuff that would be found very entertaining for you all. And I would cover those albums, review them, go into deep diving detail about those records, and essentially like let you know what you should be listening to, what's worth skipping over, or just pissing you off with my shitty ass opinions and let you just call me names and think I'm an idiot for not liking an album that you liked. Such is the way of heavy music. On top of that, talking about the album releases and reviews and all that, this being a new podcast, something that everybody wants to learn or do with their podcasts is how to make money off of it. And I would do this for fun, like it's something entertaining to do, but also as far as like monetization of it, of course, like if this podcast is lucky enough to grow and gain a fan base and get a decent amount of regular listeners, there will be ads eventually, but those boring ads of someone selling some sort of shaving product for your balls or some Blue Chew to keep your junk hard and things like that, those podcasts are like advertisements can be entertaining depending on how you review them, if they let the actual person host speaking on a podcast do the advertising, which I do plan to do if we ever get ads like that. But I wanted to do something a little bit more interactive, entertaining, an ad that you don't even realize is an ad. And that would be sponsors for the show, which are other bands, like bands that are just trying to get their music out there, get their name out there. And I would do that by having a track played on the podcast, along with some information about the band, where to look them up, what their links are, and things of that nature. And essentially like monetize things that way. However, considering that I don't currently have that big of an audience, like quite yet, considering there is no audience for the podcast of the Heavy Haystack at least, these first few episodes, I'm not sure how long, I'm thinking maybe at least the first 5 episodes of the podcast, I would be I'll host bands for free on the podcast here. You just send me a track via the email, theheavyhaystack@gmail.com, and along with an EPK type of thing where you send information about yourself, about the band, what shows you have coming up, what bands of note you have played with before, where you're touring at, and I will play a song of yours on the show for all the wonderful listeners to hear. And considering this is a small podcast right now, it will do that for the low price of free. And all you have to do is send me that information to the email. So if you're interested, just send in something to theheavyhaystack@gmail.com. And that's really the last order of business, except for the last thing is like, who am I? like, why should you even be listening to this podcast? And why did I start this thing in the first place? Well, I'll tell you. Like, I am a musician myself of the heavy musics. I drum and sing in a band called Stormtoker, which plays music of the doom metal, sludge, and alternative metal variety. Occasionally thrash. We're a huge hodgepodge of styles. We're not even totally sure what to call ourselves. We're generally stoner metal for the most part, given the name. And basically, like, I've started this podcast, and really the other things associated with this, there's a Heavy Haystack YouTube channel. I have a TikTok that I share material on. And I originally meant the Heavy Haystack to be a YouTube channel, but trying to get a metal YouTube channel off the ground is quite a challenge and quite time consuming to make those videos. And like, my last video that I did was the Meshuggah album that came out earlier this year. Since then, I've turned my attention more towards releasing things on TikTok, little reviews and little like blurbs and videos about different bands and new albums and singles coming out. But I've decided to turn my attention to podcasting because this is something I feel like I could churn out the content a lot more consistently on a much more regular basis. And on top of that, with the album ranking, don't have an official name. I'll come up with something catchy for that later. I would have the fun of the collaborative part of it, working with my bandmate to make an entertaining show where we debate records, and it'd be a very fun time for all involved because you get to be a fly on the wall as you hear people debate albums in quite the humorous fashion, basically hurling insults at each other in the most lovingly way possible. A little bit more about my history. I've been doing music reviews since 2016. I started off with just written ones on a website I had back then. It was called Just the Haystack, until I decided to get a little bit more specific, calling it the Heavy Haystack. I started the YouTube channel with a best albums of the year video. I remember it was like the best albums of 2019. It's the very first video on the YouTube channel. I recorded it in my car like a noob. And I remember my top album of 2019 was the Whitechapel record, The Valley, which, if you haven't checked that one out, you should go back and listen to it. And now I am turning my attention to podcasting, because I feel like it's something I've always wanted to do. It's a fun pastime, and I have just enough ego to think people will want to listen to my dumb voice for extended periods of time. But hopefully you do find it entertaining, and I can impress you all and entertain you with album reviews, single reviews, music news, and album ranking debates of various bands to get this podcast off the ground and make a community for us all to enjoy this love of heavy music together in a nice, happy, cohesive fashion, which probably isn't going to wind up that way, because if you've seen any metal news podcast section, it usually winds up being a pigsty of different horrible opinions. But the first episode of the official podcast I should have out soon. I'm hoping to get one out later this week if I can. Do remember that if you want to have your music from your band featured on the show, just send me an email at theheavyhaystack@gmail.com. And if you want to follow me or my socials, keep up with what I'm doing and things that I'm releasing or when podcast episodes will be released, you can follow me at The Heavy Haystack on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, or Heavy_Haystack on Twitter. Thank you all. Thank you for listening. And hopefully that when I get this first episode out, you'll find it plenty worth your time. I believe that is it. Peace, love, music, and I will see y'all next time.